Thank you, Gina, for that wonderfully rich and nuanced talk. And thank all of the presenters, all 8 of them, for these 5 wonderful presentations that somehow tie things together. There are many questions. I can see them emerging in the audience, but please hold on to them for 1 minute because we have the opportunity to hear from 3 discussants who've taken the time to engage with the papers and prepare some thoughts. First of all, Anne Rademacher from New York University.
Thank you very much. I want to just start by expressing deep gratitude to the India-China Institute, to the New School, and to the organizers of this group, which has been together, coming together for many years now. And I have really had the honor of being a part of many of the discussions that led to the rich papers that we've just heard. I feel so energized by the papers just presented, being able, as I am and many of us in the room are, to think back to several years ago when we were first engaged in these discussions about what it means to study everyday religions and sustainability in the Himalayas. Naturally then, reading the papers in preparation for joining you today to share some thoughts brought me back to that organizing question and the experience of trying to chart that analytical terrain that these papers now so beautifully animate and narrate with ethnographic content that we sought at that time. We have it. It's very, very exciting. So thanks also to the authors of the papers for allowing me to read them in advance and reflect. Now, as we've been in this discussion, as I said, over many years, we may each carry with us as researchers our own kind of personalized version of just what that analytic is, everyday religions and sustainability. But for me, to bring together analytical attention to everyday religion and sustainability is to ground that union in the context of the Himalayas, as we've been able to do today, but also to notice at least, I think, 2 things. Firstly, that in the 21st century, the very suggestion of sustainability carries with it the implication of some kind of moral imperative. While it's not always explicit, and often it's not, I think it does signal a consciousness of potential and unprecedented collapse, experience of catastrophe, doom, at its very base, loss of something, loss of history, loss of identity, loss of the collective capacity to reproduce our own social lives, our everyday lives. While at the same time, it endorses, I think, a potential for an alternative. It marks the possibility of another kind of future, another kind of everyday reality and everyday life. Now, in the Himalayas, whose global iconic status is fast shifting from the geographic location of imagined Shangri-Las, and that's Shangri-Las with a small s, right, as opposed to Shangri-La, which we heard about earlier, to global ground zero of climate change catastrophe. The Himalayas, as Ashok Gurung mentioned in his opening remarks, this is no ordinary margin in the politics, the global politics and global imaginaries and modeling of the implications of environmental change and climate change in the 21st century. Second, in using the analytic of everyday religions, I think we notice immediately that the very distinction that compels that modifier of everyday, it's supposed to reference religious life outside of organized institutions and events. This breaks down immediately. It loses meaning and it loses content. Most of the papers notice in the many places that anchor their case studies that here in the Himalayas, religious practice is overwhelmingly everyday. It's remarkably diverse. It's intricately interwoven into not only the daily lives of individuals, small collectives, and larger communities, but also into the everyday interactions with something called nature, that which is non-human, and that which is bridged through the divine to the human realm. What struck me in so many of these papers is how that analytic that combines the study of sustainability and everyday religion is brought to bear on what are really long-standing questions about the experience of change itself: urbanization, modernization, market transformation. Nature and its fate are inextricably woven into this experience, and the papers, of course, take water as the center of their analytic. In nearly every paper, I got a rich sense of what everyday religion means. I wondered at nearly every paper's conclusion what sustainability means in that everyday grounded context. I think on reading these papers that everyday religion and sustainability as an analytic helps us engage and understand a changing world animated by transnational capitalism, industrial transformation, and attendant conceptualizations and practices of modernity, all set within, however, processes, patterns, and systems that are understood as nature, natural, and either sustainable or not, designated sustainable or not. So again, I wondered in all of the papers, how do the interlocutors who helped helped all of us understand what everyday religions mean? How would they, do they, might they define sustainability? Are they invoking other terms? Are they invoking this particular term? If so, when and why, and what do we make of it? If Orlov and Catton, as Mukta Lama mentioned, remind us to regard water as a total social fact, it's in papers like these, I think, that we anchor that fact to the accounting of social gains and losses as they are expressed through natural and ecological gains and losses. Indeed, the experience of social gain and loss that renders global processes like climate change real, not just imagined and modeled, but urgent in an everyday social reproduction kind of context, and in that sense, unsustainable. Right? I have a couple specific questions that I think in the interest of time, I'll deliver individually to the presenters as opposed to reading them, right? Because I just saw the zero time. But again, deep gratitude for the invitation to share these few comments, and I look forward to the conversation that follows. Thanks to the authors.
Well, gratitude to you, Anne, for framing it so beautifully. And now, could I call on Pankaj Jain from University of North Texas to share some thoughts with us?
Thank you. I'm really glad to be here and with all the great memories of my first workshop, similar workshop held in Godavari Resort in Kathmandu, Nepal, with several of the colleagues present here. So really great to be here. I want to start with just a couple of sentences about myself. I have a PhD in South Asian religions, Hinduism, Jainism, Buddhism. And the reason I say that is that it's really unfortunate that the study of religion, which should be a big, huge prerequisite to study anything else in Asia, especially in all non-Western cultures. And unfortunately, in India, China, Nepal, Bhutan, all of South Asia, largely Asia, study of religion is not done academically. So in my own case, if I wanted a PhD in Hinduism, I cannot get it in India. I have to come to America, University of Iowa, to get a PhD in Hinduism. Reason I'm saying all this is that the paper that we saw here and the larger study of environment that is done in Asia and here, the component of religious studies is still, according to in my 2 cents, is still very negligible. It seems like a big hole in the whole study of environment. The study of religion is still like a minority field in the entire global discourse of academic and scientific discourses are highlighted. Religious discourses are still a small minority. With those remarks, I have some more to contribute on along those lines. I'll just read out. Indigenous cultures of Asia should be studied. So study of religion itself is a minority. But even study of religion that is done in some of the university departments is done using the Western philosophical discourses. So what the problem that we get is that indigenous cultures of Asia should be studied using the indigenous theories of epistemologies and hermeneutics. As Amartya Sen and others have noted, Indians and other Asians are some of the most argumentative and dialogic cultures of the world, and perhaps multidimensional terms such as dharma, which have been used in such dialogues and multilogues for the semantics of religion, sustenance, ethics, virtues, inherent nature, righteousness, law, and cosmic rhythm. So those are the terms, those are the multivalent terms like dharma that should be developed as theories to study the religious cultures and larger cultures of Asia. That is largely missing, even in the departments which do study Asian religions. I think the environmental problems are the result of seeing the world in the Cartesian dichotomies of nature versus culture, humans versus ecology, and such seemingly dialectical forces can be seen as a holistic time-space continuum by the non-Western theories of knowledge, such as that based on dharma. For centuries, the West has deployed Western theories to study and interpret the non-West either as exotic other or romantic other, as demonstrated by Edward Said, Ronald Indon, and many others. But even today, we have virtually no Asian theory to study Asia. And here I suggest that dharma offers an alternative. Continuing. Unfortunately, the study of Asian religious traditions remain conspicuously absent both in Asia and the West, and this lack of knowledge about the foundations of Asian cultures, I would argue, has led to all the current problems that we see in those papers and yesterday's documentary. Now coming to the specific papers, Mukta Singh Lama. Yesterday's documentary and some of the remarks made this morning, and Mukta Singh Lama made this remark that Nepal, Kathmandu is no more remote with globalization taking place now. It is seeing all these changes and transactions and so on. But just to remind everybody here and myself that none of the Asian territories were ever remote. It's not just a new phenomenon. For the last 5,000 years of history of Asia and India and China, in short, Chindia, the history of sustainability goes to 5,000 years or 5 millennia, with their continuous history of interactions with Greeks, Jews, Christians, Muslims, Huns, Mongols, Zoroastrians, early Europeans, Romans, Portuguese, British, Dutch, Germans, not to mention the Silk Route linking China, India, today's Bangladesh, all the way to the Middle East. So it was never a remote territory, just as a reminder. All right, then some of the papers also mentioned that new religious movements have become influential for last few decades, and they are trying to work their way towards reviving some environment and religion and so on. But again, as a reminder, for last 2 millennia, even Buddhism came as a new religious movement that spread across Asia, which not only, and we saw some of the papers very powerfully, very beautifully, that Buddhist monks have done the role of not just religion as we see in the Western terms, but religion as not just everyday religion, but religion in Buddhism and Hinduism and Jainism and much of the Asia is not just everyday, but it's every moment awareness. Every moment, mindfulness and momentary mindfulness and consciousness, awareness, that is to be done every moment, not just every day. So that which is every moment is religion. That which is religion is every moment. So just as again some of the remarks that I gathered from the papers. I think first few, Mukta Singh Lama's paper mentioned that caste roles are seen as religious roles. But that again seems to be very studied again using really Western ways of going from outside in. But if you study these traditions from inside out, we have to remind ourselves that castes became castes as an evolution of the tribal rules and several tribes, several indigenous communities. Tribe itself is a loaded term, but indigenous communities became the castes. They evolved into castes. So those same rules of marriage and rituals and social structure that has preserved in these caste rules, not just the rules of religion. Coming to Lakshmi Shakya's presentation, water as sacred and social element. So we have to see, and we have to go back to several other indigenous communities all over India, in Nepal and China, where all they have done is they have revived the medieval water resources for doing the rainwater harvesting. I know in my own research, in my own book, which came out in 2011, my focus was dharma and ecology of Hindu communities in India, where I studied a new religious movement called Swadhyaya movement, which has revived more than 100,000 water harvesting sites, which were very powerfully active until medieval times, but in British colonial times, they got so ignored in the zeal to go towards so-called scientific and modern and urbanized way of water harvesting, those sites were ignored. And so all they did is to revive those sites. I know, just one more minute. And then Lebo's paper, I already mentioned that religion is every moment, urban versus rural. And also Mahendra Lama mentioned that dharma versus local faith, dharma versus vishwas and all that. But we are forgetting that dharma as a notion, as a term, was never against the local faith. All the discourses, all the scriptures, all the texts, all the traditions, all the gods and goddesses in the entire pantheon of Hinduism and Buddhism, they always were interacting with local faiths. The local gods and goddesses entered the so-called Hindu official pantheon, and the official Hindu pantheon always went out and reached out to the local faith. So this interaction, this dichotomy, the dichotomy between the official versus local is a false dichotomy, again largely seen from outside in. So that dichotomy did not exist for thousands of years. If we go back to the text, I have several other comments, but I'm running out of time. I'm here to interact with the presenters as needed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pankaj, for these constructively provocative comments that challenge us to think about repositioning Dharma as a local or regional interpretive framework, and also for introducing this powerful idea of every moment, every minute religion. And now the wheel has come full circle, and it gives me great pleasure to ask Marylyn Tucker from Yale University to come and share some thoughts.
So, first of all, many, many thanks to Gina and to Ashok and to my colleagues at Yale, Mark, Sarah, and Andrew, and of course my colleagues from Columbia, where we studied these traditions, and many others here today. So I actually am picking up on both Anne and Dr. Jain's comments. The first part of what I want to say, and thanks to these excellent papers, is everyday religion. So we're talking about tradition in modernity. We're trying to analyze and focus on the interpenetration of high culture, popular culture, and so on. But we do have to take into account the history of these traditions and the anthropology, sociology, and politics that brings them to our fuller understanding. So these notions of syncretism, hybridity, multi-religious perspectives. In fact, this has been, well, our contemporary study highlights it. It has been part both of the traditions on the ground and of the study of it. I would say we need texts and traditions to understand religions on the ground, but we need these on-site studies, which are absolutely indispensable and extraordinarily helpful. So the dialogism that Gina's pointing to, as well as many of the papers are pointing to this retrieval and reevaluation of tradition in modernity, which is right to the point. The resilience of indigenous knowledge or traditional environmental knowledge, TEAK, is also much to the fore here, because we need, as Lebo's paper pointed out, place-based, scale-sensitive, community-oriented policies for sustainable development. Now that brings me to the second part of my paper, which picks up on what Anne was challenging us to think about, is sustainability. I'd rather use the word flourishing, and the flourishing of the Earth community, because that to me is the more holistic context that we need to get at. Do you want your relationship with your lover to be sustainable or flourishing? Let's think more imaginatively about this future, this shared future of our planetary community. So very briefly, I'll touch on 4 points here that these papers share, and that is change, challenge, controversy, and conservation. So the first is, of course, rapid ecological change. Population explosion from 2 billion to 6 billion in 1 century changes everything. Urbanization, over 50 million in cities now. Scarcity of water and climate change, highlighted in every paper. Pollution and purity problems, such as Kelly Alley did with the Ganga and so on. This is so central to what we need to think through. The second point, the challenge. Big challenge here that we haven't quite touched on is equity, isn't it? And that is distribution. Agriculture versus energy, rural versus urban. So how do we bring to bear a new ethics to deal with equity issues? Controversy, Politics, too, needs to enter in more, and we're at the new school, and that came up last night. So who decides which voices matter? Pluralism and participation, the local, the regional, the state, the global. How are we going to integrate these better? And the final point here is conservation. We need a new integrated conservation. That's what we're pointing to. So let me make a few suggestions for ecological change, the challenge of equity, the political controversies, and integrated conservation. And that is, we need a holistic ecology. We need a recognition of the dynamic and organic dimensions of ecosystems, of nature, of bioregions, of watersheds, and so on. These are not just to be manipulated or studied with a reductionist scientific policy method, but we need new adaptive management that has reciprocity at the core, which is, again, what came up in many of the papers. Then for the challenge of equity, we need clearly eco-justice. We need this refreshing and dynamic integration of people and planet. Years ago, people said to me, oh, you're studying the environment. That's just whitewater rafting or something. No, this is the future of the planet. And that very juicy dynamic of eco-justice needs to come into play. And then for a politics that's more integrated as well. Lynn White, years ago, while he criticized Christianity and Western religions, he came up in his work, which is not yet fully appreciated, with an idea of biodemocracy. Biodemocracy. One of our graduate students is writing on this. And I think that sense of a larger context of principles and practices needs to also come to the fore here. And that brings me to my final point, which is, so what would an integrated conservation look like? And I think we do need to draw on two documents that have come up over the last decade and plus. One is more recently is the Universal Declaration of the Rights of Mother Nature, with 30,000 people gathering in Bolivia, and Colombia now having documents, principles in their constitution of the rights of nature. So that document, I think, is worth looking at. But the other one is the Earth Charter. And that came out, as you probably know, of the Earth Summit in '92. And it was a 10-year process of tremendous participation at every scale and level. And the integration there is this. It's ecological integrity. It's saying without the integrity of ecosystems, which again, we're only beginning to understand what that means, we won't have the basis for the future of life. That is a primary principle that we need to re-inhabit that space of ecological integrity and redefine it. Secondly, justice. The Earth Charter is calling to social and economic justice. We can't have an economics that doesn't recognize the primacy of Earth systems. And finally, the Earth Charter points to institutions that are going to ensure that. It's democracy, nonviolence, and peace. And I was part of the drafting committee of the Earth Charter, and the nonviolence came from India, from the Gandhian principles, and so on. So this new integration, I think, is something that we need to think about and redefine: ecology, justice, and peace. Thank you so much for these wonderful presentations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Evelyn, for just thinking big with us and helping to situate these discussions in much wider global debates, and also helping us to maybe change some of our conjugations and adjectives and conjunctions here. Everyday religion in sustainable or flourishing, and not durable environments. So to that end, we have about 25 minutes for questions. Could I please invite the 8 presenters to reoccupy this podium? I'm going to take myself off it, and we'll get maybe 2 more chairs from the organizing committee here, please, if we could do that. And I gather we have questions also coming in from the live stream. I'm not sure where they've come from, but we're hoping to read some of those out and engage with a wider debate. Could I entreat those who want to ask questions to keep them relatively short, also to maybe introduce themselves and address the person or people from whom they would like a response. Otherwise, you're going to get 8 responses. All right. Please. Kamal Baba.
Kamal Baba from University of Massachusetts, Boston. Just taking up the last point, or the last comments from Mary Tucker, very good points. And keeping the question very brief, to what extent religion fosters or is a hindrance to our notions of sustainability or a flourishing planet? Just 2 comments would be enough. I think we talked in very vague terms how it can foster, but I don't think there were any specific examples mentioned.
Would anybody like to take that one on? I see Mary Evelyn engaging.
Yeah, because I think all your papers did point out ways in which religion is adapting and assisting, especially on the ground. So I think we have tremendous examples.
Let me continue with a provocative question. To what extent organized religion, as we understand and as it is practiced throughout the Himalayas, might be a hurdle?
Well, can I jump in with that question, if you don't mind? Thank you, Dr. Bawa, for bringing that question to our attention. This is something that we have had many discussions about over the last 2 years. There is a lot of indications, at least if you look at the text, of how religion could apply towards sustainable environments. And the challenge that we've been engaging is in each of our field sites, it's not nearly that simple or as direct as the case studies have shown. The challenge that I have in my field site, and I'll just speak for myself for the time being, is that the sacred notions of the Ganga have actually fueled a lot of its destruction. People talk about only needing to dip, pinky into the waters, and then their cultural needs are met for the Ganga. Which is why I thought it was very interesting, and it was very interesting for me to go back to this region and look, where the Ganga was the media through which everyone centered their lives, look at other resources and look at other ways of making meaning. And layering into that new discourses about environmental conservation, which are growing and emerging. And I think I see promise in that respect, in terms of the way that all these conversations are coming together and influencing people's practices. So we can never imagine that people are going to just forge forward as secular environmentalists, completely swayed by logics of conservation or some notion of sustainability. It will always be embedded within a particular cultural logic that they'll draw from selectively. But I think that a lot of the papers from my other colleagues really draw out how that's happening in the process now that there's so much crises around water and waste management, which haven't yet emerged in my research site, but are increasingly arising.
I think I'll just have to take this on. Dr. Bab, I think from experiences in Darjeeling and Gangtok is that I think there is definitely one which is the organized religion and then the so-called the sacredness from the text and all that. But also I think it has to be looked at it from the perspective of a very decentralized perspective where like in oral traditions, like, if you look at Darjeeling, all the springs are very sacred. And also there are reflections of maybe not textual, but like there are knowledge bases which talk about what to be planted in the upstream of the stream, of the springs, what can be done, what cannot be done. But I think the challenge is that most water-based discussions are very centralized, talking about, for example, the 2 twin lakes in Darjeeling, and not talk about the 32 springs that are there in the urban landscape. And I think that's the challenge. And also the basic challenge is already there from an organized religion and how people practice it, because a majority of people in Darjeeling come from the oral tradition, and it's just that it is like, scheduled within the thing. And so in that sense, I think there are a lot of nuances, but I think the challenge is to see the diversity and also go beyond the written texts. I think so.
Any other comments? Please, Mahinda.
Well, Professor Ba, I think when we talk about a kind of a provocation like what you said, how religion works as a hindrance towards environmental security. I would feel that per se, religion and environmental security do not contradict. Right? If you see any practice anywhere in the mountain areas, all religions would promote what you call environmental security, because they all worship nature. What really matters is what comes in between religion and environmental security. In between, the major actor is the state, right? And it is the state which regulates, it is the state which promotes development-led destructions. It is the state which is supposed to monitor all these actors. So it is the collapse of the state-related institutions that have failed and that have withdrawn, and suddenly you find a vacuum anywhere in the mountain areas, and you see that, and people start blaming religion for all kinds of all kinds of destructions or environmental insecurity. So I think it has to be looked into from the perspective of what is a core or what is the key actor in these two in the interactive matrix of these religion and environmental security.
Mukherjee?
Yeah, I like the word flourishing instead of sustainable. I use that one. But in my writing, I took reference from the Brundtland Commission, which says sustainability, particularly in the context of use of the resources, natural resources. It says a development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the needs of the future generation to meet their own needs. So I thought, we are just going on that. But I fully agree that from the case of Nepal also, if the environmental degradation is there, then the social collectivity, social organization and processes also seems to deteriorate. So it should go together. I fully agree with you, and thank you for your comment. On the sustainability question further, when I was trying to link with this notion of social fact, water is social fact, again this use, what I was trying to say was like, the encompassing and multiple, kind of attachment and interaction use of water by an individual for, for material and non-material life. It seems like it's a very powerful kind of thing that religion gives a context for a person to live with. Again, borrowing from Moss, Marcel Moss, who says that gift has a power to sort of return. I was thinking this idea of encompassing attachment and interaction with a natural element like water, this gives a power for an individual to sort of counter the challenges posed by the modernity, urbanization, and so forth. So our example is the efforts of the women to organize to clean up their water sources, and go to the political leaders to talk about how to restore the water pipes, or provide a good distribution and so forth. So there's an element within these religious practices that can counter the challenges. That was I was trying to say.
Thank you. We have a question from the gentleman in the third row, and then one from the gentleman, two from the back.
I'm wondering about two things. One is to what extent you found the cultural legacies are transmitted through the secular education programs, particularly children, since children are a critical transmission belt for all of this. They become us, hopefully better. And the second I was thinking about, but certainly the concluding presenter about this broader cultural thing. Do you envision something going beyond, certainly I guess speaking to melting glaciers and the like, of looking more broadly at the other literally high cultural areas around the planet and their approaches? I would pull out two ancient systems, one that sort of exists, one that's collapsed, one in Persia, the Kanat system of water distribution, and then, and I forget what they've called, but the contemporaneous Inca system in Peru that the conquistadors had destroyed. That people had an awareness of them, and they were obviously tied into the broader cultural system. So I'm just sort of wondering if you have any sense on either of those.
Shall I begin? Anyone want to jump in?
So maybe I'm not in the position of speaking about Tibetan Buddhism. I mean, Dzongkha Rinpoche is here. He's authority on the Tibetan Buddhism. So I'm just talking something about the counting experience for our study. I'm not quite sure about the definition of high culture or low culture, because for me, in our study, I think there's no such division of high culture and low culture for Tibetan Buddhism. The majority of the Tibetan peoples are Tibetan Buddhism's believers. And also, I also like the idea about for everyday religion, it should be the every moment of consciousness, and we should cultivate such notion, and we should educate the local people to raise up their consciousness about environmental protection, and the local people are also very responsive about. They are very sensitive about their local, the changing of their local environment. For counting people, they set up their own NGO groups, non-government organizations, and they cooperate with some international non-government organizations. Some of their research people even got awarded about their research. I mean, and just like my papers, I mean, there is a greater resource in the Tibetan Buddhism, like the idea about the reciprocity between human and nature. We should try to teach people about this traditional knowledge and also the local knowledge. That's my opinion just now. Thank you.
Just a quick response to the children part of it. I think that's a very interesting question as such. I think there are, from what we discussed and what we saw, there are two ways of looking at it. One is, what does the education system give to the children, and then what happens at a more informal level. And I think at a very, what Dr. Lama was talking about it, I mean, state-run education system has environmental science embedded in the syllabus as such, but it's pure environment. And many a times in the Himalaya, or at least from a Darjeeling Gangtok perspective, you're taught about larger systems in India, but not necessarily from a very Himalaya perspective. So you end up learning about rubber trees and stuff like that, which doesn't grow in Darjeeling or in Gangtok. Right. But I think the second part of it, what people learn informally, is very important. But also then, how does that informal spaces get adapted? Because I think if you remember one of the slides from Darjeeling, where an artist was talking about how children and people are removed from the from the tradition where they used to live with nature, and in a concrete jungle, how do you manage that? So in that sense, I think it is, for me, I think the research kind of points to a state of flux when you talk about children as of now, and how they would adapt it to the coming generation, coming days will be quite interesting. One of the examples that I did talk about where the lepcha daily family ritual, which needed bamboo, water, is now been transferred to once a year at the river source, because the spring is no longer there in the community. And it was a decision that emerged out of a dialogue between the parents and the son, you know, and that, I think, that flux is something that I don't think we can really describe as of now, but that's the perspective that is there.
Can I jump in really quickly with a response? I'll try to make it as short as possible. Thank you for the question. In my field site, I do see environmental education definitely increasing through education, through new textbooks that are reaching to the schools, and also through media. But I think the larger question is really this tension. I mean, I don't want to call it a tension per se, but there's a difference between epistemology, right, how we learn about things, and ontology, the things that we see as possible and as existing in landscapes. And in the Himalaya, there's many sentient beings, there's divine entities abound, and these aren't myths, they're not stories, they are lived realities for the people in that region. So I think one of the ethical things that we have to contend with in doing this sort of work is, yes, we can talk about the epistemologies of environmental science, and we see that as coming true. But then in our conversations with people, how, to what a degree can we challenge their ontological sense of whether or not these glaciers have agency to revive themselves, which is something that I've written about in the Journal for the Study of Religion, Nature, Culture, and the compilation of those papers are being published by Routledge in a book on how the world religions are responding to climate change. It's not all rosy, but it's something we're trying to build kind of a patchwork picture of, to see what the kind of the sticking points and the challenges are, and what the opportunities are as well.
Okay. Very briefly.
Yeah, I think in the critical transmission mechanisms, besides the children, I would feel the traditional institutions would have to play a very, very critical role. In the mountain areas, one of these most formidable challenges for all of us is how to really relocate first these traditional institutions, re-establish them, revive them, and bring them to the mainstream discourse. In the universities today, in the mountain areas, one of our formidable challenges, of course, is to really work with these traditional institutions. First of all, we have forgotten all these traditional institutions. They used to be the custodian of knowledge. They used to be the source of actions, and they used to be what you call the means of sustainability. Now, all of us have ignored that. And that's a very critical challenge. And one of the things which many of us in the university system, in the mountain areas are doing is exactly this: how to relocate them and to revitalize them. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to take a gaggle of perhaps 5 questions. Gentleman there, Hilary, sir, and 2 others here, and then we'll see whether we answer them. All questions must be aired.
Thank you, Richard Jordan, International Council for Caring Communities, with a question for Li Po. Since all of the presentations were very visual, do you think that we need to have filmmakers make full-length feature movies, not YouTubes, but full-length feature movies that will show the replenishment of the earth and the replenishment of the traditions linking to the water? Thank you.
Thanks. Hilary Faxon from Yale School of Forestry. Yeah, for Lipo and Georgina as well, both of you mentioned the role of the monastery in your field site. And I'm wondering where you think that as an institution has a role to play in helping people learn how to mediate their relationship with the environment. Thanks.
Thank you for your wonderful presentation. My name is Dan Smaryu from the Max Planck Institute. My questions are specifically for Lipo and Liu Yong and Yamatrashi. In your papers presented, I see that, maybe I'm wrong, correct me, and I see you use sustainable environment with the sustainable development interchangeably. And then in the China context, development actually, to me, almost exclusively means modernization. And development here in the West also involves development study, which involves the idea of a human flourishing, sustainable development, environmental sustainability, etc. So I just wanted you to clarify that how you use sustainable development in your papers. Thank you.
Cheng Yuan, a retired professor of history. I was just wondering about the term everyday religion, because it seems to me there are a lot of contradictions there. I was thinking particularly of Jainism with the emphasis on non-injury, ahimsa, but some of the top industrialists and polluters in India are Jains by religion. So I see there's a contradiction there. Also, it seems to me, as I was witness of cremation in Kathmandu not too long ago, this past year. And I know this is cremation creating the effect of polluting the river. And what can you do about that? So I see these problems.
Thank you. And maybe a final question here from sitting Saturday.
Sorry. Okay. Hi, I'm an observer. I'm Hope Cook, and questions mainly to Roshan Rai and to Professor Mahendra Loma. I was mainly interested in Georgina, who really talked about the role of hydroelectric And to me, I was kind of missing or a little surprised there was no mention of the mega dams under democracy in Sikkim, that now the Tista has more or less disappeared. So for children, for children to have a study of their environment through the schools that's remedial to help them go back to understand their countryside, actually what the children are seeing in the locations is that their river is no longer there. So it does seem to me that macro, I know this conversation is mostly around micro, but macro about land use, the tremendous internal migrations due to land loss, the Indian Army, the incredible flux of people that have brought people to Gangtok may now look good compared to Darjeeling, which has been an urban slum for half a century, but Gangtok is well on the road to that. So this macro stuff, the dams in the Zongo area, the people since the 90s who have been on hunger strike, that also would be part of the education of people to land resources. So I hope there will be a macro-micro effect.
And last but not least, Sering Shakya, then Elizabeth Allison.
Sering Shakya from University of British Columbia. One word that was absent from all the paper was about agriculture. And one impression from the presenter's paper is that the Himalayas is really urbanized, and that agriculture is no longer important. So does the panel take the position that the agriculture in Himalayas have become redundant?
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Allison from the California Institute of Integral Studies. Roshan Rai, your recent comment about changing practices based on degradation of natural resources just caused me to think about the necessity of nature for the sustainability of religion, which I think was implicit in many of your papers, but I wanted to bring that into the conversation so that we're looking at sustainability in both directions. It's not just the land on which we live, but it's also the practices and beliefs that we have.
May I ask our convener if we can give us 5 minutes for our respondents too? Thank you. All right. Please.
Libo had several questions.
About the films, I agree with you. I think capturing, recording what local livelihood is about and cultural practices are very important. But oftentimes we make mistakes by parachuting outsiders' schedule and the design of the film into a place with a limited time frame. What we produced is something that help outsiders to understand to some extent, but it doesn't necessarily reflect what local people's priority is. I think I had the opportunity to work with villages and leaving cameras with them, video cameras with them, for a long period of time without understanding the language, the local language, and we went through a lengthy period of time to try to understand why they shoot that and what they choose from the footage to express the issue that they feel central to them. I think a very short piece was shared by actually Gina's class with the students. It took a long time, I have to say, time investment, money investment to really bring out that kind of essence. But oftentimes our project-based intervention doesn't allow us to do that. About the institutions, religious institutions, I think quite a few of my friends have responded to that. We are facing a challenge these days that the sort of the Western science-based education system oftentimes delineates the generation or the heritage of traditional knowledge, because there is so much pressure for them to pass the exam and to get the jobs, and that's the notion. Whereas the traditional knowledge, no matter religious institution or sort of a customary learning by doing kind of institution, they are less legitimate because children are forced to spend more time in the formal education system. They don't understand. Simply, they don't understand what the traditional livelihood are. And also, I guess my final response about the agriculture, I absolutely agree with your question. I think it is not my intention in my paper to say urbanization is about everything. In fact, I alert the issue that faster, high-speed urbanization has a huge danger to erode their agriculture, and including the herding practices, which are very central to those highlands. Thank you.
Go ahead, Nimitashi. I'll go next.
So I just want to respond about our distinction of the two definitions, the sustainable development and the sustainable environment. In my writing, I think only the sustainable development in the economic sense could bring the sustainable environment for in the future time, endurable environment. Because nowadays the influence of consumerism in the developed country has influenced some underdeveloped country greatly. People just neglect their natural resources to seek for the better life. I mean, the consumerism has a great impact on the environment. It's a development notion. I mean, the third one is, just in our Shangri-La meeting, we also discussed the three actors, like the environment, religion, and the development. How these three definitions interpenetrated with each other and interplay with each other. And also, here, in our Shangri-La discussion, we would rather to use the definition of environments. It's a plural form, not just a single form. It's close to the meaning of habitats, advocated by the Pierre Bourdieu. Habitats, people's living environment. Thank you.
I'd like to respond quickly to the comment on micro-macro, which I appreciate. I'm going to talk around it a little bit. We can talk about dams in the Himalaya afterwards. I'd love to discuss that with you. But in terms of what our project has been, I think that in addition to everything we've explained today, one of the things that we're really engaging is cultural politics, right? So the politics on the ground of both how people are understanding the resources and why they value them and how they enter people's day-to-day lives, and how they should be managed, moving up scales, right, including to municipalities and state. And so I think that that's more the sense that you get from these papers. Now there's a different lens that we could also adapt, which right now is a little preliminary, but maybe moving forward we could, which is to look at the cultures of politics, right? Rather than cultural politics. So looking at the way that people have a sense of their ability to mobilize and make change in the areas that they work in, which is, one thing that I would push back slightly on is the fact that it's not all about the state. If we're talking about India, for instance, it is a constitutional democracy. So there should be a way for people to have a voice. And that's one of the things we've seen with all these Save Ganga movements. There's such a small minority of the population. If half of India's Hindu population rose up and did something to save the Ganga, there would really be a strong movement and the government would have to cede. So there are other things culturally going on within the political terrain that I think would be interesting to bring in later, but we haven't yet addressed it.
On the question of cremation in the river in Kathmandu, what we found was from our interviews, people are facing kind of dilemma, kind of contradictions, and also you could say a transition, because traditionally religion, told us that river has a power to wash away, clean all the dirts and pollutions and sins, and the river has as a goddess has a power to lead you to heaven and so forth. But the reality is changing. with the population growth and everything. Cremation is there, waste is there, showers is there, everything. So people have not yet been able to sort of believe, what is the way to go ahead. In one hand, they have got this belief that, river has a power, but on the other hand, the reality is that. So what we feel is like, since everyday religion is adaptive to the real situation, then probably it'll lead to a certain, direction, unlike sticking in the canonical kind of religion. So also in the caste thing, I think we are in a contradiction. Young people live with a contradiction, because in the school we are taught that caste is bad. It's against the ideas of equality and discrimination. But in formal setting, you have to deal with that every day. So young people are sort of struggling with how to deal with this kind of dilemma. Same is also true for local language, indigenous knowledges. There are good practices, but also encouraging modern, sense of things. So I think everyday religion hopefully have a sort of ways to adapt to, understand the changing situation and adapt accordingly. Because, things like, I like the Gina's, framework, the dialogical. The tradition and modernity is in dialogue right now in our Himalayas. And even in a climate change situation, they are looking at what causes this and what would be the local responses. So I think it's a creative process if we take everyday religion as like, unfolding as it develops.
Dui Sabda, Mahendraji?
Quickly on the macro, ma'am raised about it. In a place like Sikkim, we did not include the macro features, but we are very concerned about the macro features there. In a place like Sikkim today, what we really require is a critical mass of institutions and a critical mass of people who would really take forward this debate about how nature has been sold by the political leadership there. It's a big question today. What we are demanding, what we are asking for is democratization of democracy, right? That is what we are demanding today. The people, indigenous people, the institutions there, the universities there are basically discussing this. How do we democratize our democracy so that government or the state listens to what is the reality there? Therefore, what we are doing in Sikkim today is we have now a set of good institutions in Sikkim, right? We just founded one national university there. And one of the key elements, one of the key engagements of Sikkim University, which is a national university, is again nature, right? Water. And we have had a number of programs in Sikkim University, main academic programs, semi-academic programs like Oral History Project, like Winter Sojourn Program, Museum and Archives, sharing of all kinds of that would engage people, traditional institutions, and also work for what you call the sustainability of the natural resources and development process there.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, I have the unenviable position of standing between you and your lunch. And I think it's time for me to sit down and you to stand up. But before I do that, my apologies to all of you who have not been able to ask your questions, because I know you have them. But this session is the beginning, not the end of the discussion. And before I thank the presenters and all the discussants for their wonderful thoughts, a few words from Ashokurung.
I wanted to just kind of make an announcement and congratulate Kamal Bawa and Sandesh Kandor. A wonderful new book called Himalaya, Mountains of Life has just been published. And Kamalji Bawa has kindly brought a few copies here. And if you want to look at it, it's on the display there. And it sells for, I think, $50. Any proceed from this would go to a conservation fund, and that will be managed by A-Tree. So we would encourage you to consider getting whatever copies we have. And those of you who are interested in getting more copies, there will be a sign-up sheet that people can put their names on, and then I'm sure someone will get back to you. Okay.